Fear Zone, your channel for true horror stories. Good evening to all the brave souls joining us. Today, we're sharing the chilling story of Mr. Jean, which took place in Londrina, Brazil, back in 2017. At 28, Jean worked as a delivery assistant alongside a truck driver, unloading crates of fruits and vegetables at city markets. He often spent entire days on the road, returning home only around 10 o'clock at night. Living in a rural neighborhood surrounded by dirt roads and dark woods, his demanding routine didn't keep him from diligently doing his job. However, things started taking a disturbing turn when, after arriving home late at night from work, Jean would walk through his neighborhood to get to his house. At a certain point, he began noticing a strange man. This figure would roam the dirt roads at night, and on some occasions, he was seen entering and exiting the forest as if he had something to hide. These encounters were silent and stealthy, but the man's constant presence, always lurking near the woods, started to fill Jean with a growing sense of unease. The stranger seemed to appear at the same time each night, almost as if he was waiting for the truck to pass. One night, the situation escalated. A heavy storm hit the area, and since Jean was in a nearby town for a delivery, he and his colleague didn't manage to finish their work until around 11 o'clock. By the time the truck finally returned to Jean's neighborhood, it was the middle of the night, and rain was still pouring, mingling with the wind that made the trees sway. When the truck stopped at the usual spot, the driver mentioned he couldn't go any further since the truck wouldn't make it on the muddy dirt roads. Jean stepped out into the rain and began his walk down the dirt road toward his house, which was about 20 minutes away. But that night, he couldn't shake off a heavy sense of foreboding. Jean arrived at a part of the dirt road where there was a stream beside it. In the dim light, he swore he saw a figure standing in the bushes. It could have been the strange man from the forest, but the heavy rain blurred his vision, preventing him from clearly making out what was really there. With his heart racing, Jean couldn't tell if what he felt was the chill of the night or the fear that something else awaited him in the early hours. He walked back toward his neighborhood, the sound of his footsteps echoing on the dirt trail, and the solitude of the night brought on an eerie sense of alertness. As he reached a bridge he had to cross to get home, the sky burst into a heavy downpour. Water ran down his face and soaked his clothes, and the creek below the bridge swelled with the rain, but he pressed on, determined to cross the wooden bridge to reach the other side. The noise of the rain drowned out all other sounds, until, as he neared the end of the bridge, Jean saw something ahead that froze him. In front of him, a massive shadow emerged between the trees, moving fast. Jean began to back away slowly, abandoning his attempt to cross the bridge. As he got a better look, he realized it was a terrifying creature, resembling a black dog, but its immense size made it even more bizarre. The creature began charging toward him, emerging from the woods with a menacing speed and reaching the bridge. Panicked, Jean realized he wouldn't have time to escape. The animal looked like a fierce beast, and the risk of being attacked was real. Without a second thought, Jean decided to jump. He hurled himself off the bridge and into the creek, which, though swollen from the rain, didn't harm him due to its relatively low height. He clung to the vegetation on the creek bank. But when he looked up, the horror only intensified. The creature stood on the bridge, watching him, upright like a man. Its hands, yes, hands, gripped the wooden bridge railing, while its head, with enormous ears, held an expression that was part animal, part humanoid. It was a hairy being, almost human-sized, staring at him intently, with an expression mixing ferocity and something incomprehensible. He couldn't contain his fear. That look left him horrified and paralyzed, as if he'd witnessed something from another world. Luckily, Jean was in the water with some brush around him, and the werewolf couldn't find him. At that moment, he was certain he was facing a werewolf. The creature's eyes gleamed intensely, as if two embers were burning in its animalistic face. His decision was immediate. Get out of there as quickly as possible. He saw the creature return to all fours and cross the wooden bridge, reaching the dirt path. Without thinking twice, Jean crouched low in the creek, holding his breath and trying not to make any movement that would draw attention. He watched anxiously as the werewolf walked along the narrow trail beside the ravine. The creature looked around with a hungry gaze, as if determined to find Jean. Realizing he was still in danger, Jean, in a desperate move, plunged into the shallow creek, letting his body sink as much as possible. He stayed submerged for a few moments, hoping the creature wouldn't notice him. Time seemed to drag on until, Finally, the rain intensified, and the werewolf disappeared. Gene scanned the area carefully, convinced the animal was indeed a werewolf and could be hiding, plotting an ambush. Nearly an hour passed, and, feeling the danger had passed, he carefully climbed up the creek's bank and stepped onto a nearby road. His breathing was fast, his heart pounding, and his legs trembling as he looked around for any sign of the predator. To his relief, the werewolf had reappeared on the other side of the river, still far away. The creature saw Gene, descended to the creek, stood up on its hind legs, and paused, seeming hesitant to cross the water. The werewolf didn't dare to cross the stream, ending its pursuit of Gene. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Gene sprinted down the street until he reached his neighborhood. Seeing the first houses and paved streets, he felt a greater sense of relief, believing the monster wouldn't dare follow him there. Still terrified, he reached home and locked himself in his room, but sleep was scarce. He spent the early hours thinking about the creature and the real danger he had faced. At dawn, curiosity began to overcome his fear, and he decided to revisit the location to better understand what he had witnessed. Around 8 a.m., he invited a friend to join him by the creek. Together, they walked down the same dirt path where the werewolf had appeared in the night, which now seemed even darker under the daylight. As they moved forward, they entered the underbrush to look for any sign of the creature, but soon Gene and his friend spotted a strange man among the trees, someone Gene had seen on previous nights, always solitary, walking through the woods as if he were part of that hostile environment. It was the same figure who roamed the area at night. The most disturbing part was that this time, the man seemed to be dragging something along the ground, an invisible weight that made the scene even more unsettling. Gene and his friend kept walking, but they soon realized that, upon noticing their presence, the man attempted to blend in and quickly disappeared into the vegetation. It seemed like he was up to something shady in the woods. Both were on high alert, as the man's behavior was, to say the least, suspicious. However, they decided to ignore him and keep going. Along the way, curiosity led them back to where the man had been moments before, hoping to see what he had been dragging. As they approached, they were shocked. It was a dead dog, its body marked with deep scratches and bites that had torn large pieces of flesh. The sight left them stunned. They wondered why the man had acted so furtively, leaving the dog's body hidden in the vegetation before vanishing without a trace. After that unsettling discovery, they continued on their way to the spot where Gene had once seen the wolfman, but there were no signs of the creature. With that disturbing image lingering in his mind, Gene returned home, trying to make sense of the encounter. The wolfman he'd seen, and now this suspicious man dragging the dead dog, possibly a victim of the wolfman. Eventually, Gene went to work, trying to resume his normal routine. During that period, on his nightly returns home, he would get off the truck close to his house in the urbanized area, fearing another encounter with the strange wolfman. One night, Gene and the driver, on their way back from work, passed along a road near the neighborhood and noticed something peculiar. 4 dogs barking persistently toward the woods as if they were sensing something dangerous and unknown. The scene caught their attention, as the dogs seemed to be trying to scare off something hiding in the forest's darkness. Curious, the driver stopped the truck to see what was happening, and, looking out the vehicle's window, he noticed that the dogs appeared frightened, their eyes fixed on something concealed in the forest as if they sensed a threat. At that moment, Gene thought he might have come upon the trail of the wolfman himself. The two of them watched the vegetation closely, trying to see what might be hidden there. To their surprise, they spotted, in the shadows, the same suspicious man who, days earlier, had been seen dragging the body of a dead dog. Without giving them a chance to react, the man cast a furtive glance in Gene's direction and seemed startled. Soon after, he vanished into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind only an uneasy sense of dread. The dogs, standing on the road, backed away fearfully, as if they sensed the presence of something dangerous. After that strange encounter, the driver started the truck, and they left the area, but the scene stayed alive in their minds. As Gene returned home, the image of that man and the dead dog wouldn't leave his thoughts. Gene began to wonder if the man in the woods might somehow be connected to the werewolf. Weeks passed, and the work routine continued. At night, as he returned in the truck to the same area he always passed through, he noticed the mysterious man no longer appeared there. Something felt off, and he couldn't stop thinking about what had really happened that fateful night. Why had that man been dragging the lifeless body of an animal? The dog had clearly been attacked by a beast, But what was the man's connection to the creature that mutilated it? Or had the werewolf attacked the suspect, which was why he hadn't been seen since? It was then that a dark suspicion began to take shape. He started imagining that the man could be a werewolf. Perhaps in monster form, he had attacked the poor dog, and later, in human form, he wanted to hide the body, as a way to conceal his own supernatural crime. Each time he recalled the man's gaze disappearing into the darkness, the idea seemed to make more sense. And what about the dogs that had surrounded the road that night? They seemed to have been either attracted or repelled by some invisible force, as if they sensed the threat that man represented. In all of this, Jean was sure of his encounter with a werewolf, and perhaps that man who roamed the woods at night and hid the bodies of animals was, in fact, a creature of the shadows. The suspect also left the area, as people like Jean knew his secret. This is yet another chilling story from the Noche Embrujada channel. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the Fear Zone channel.